it was a great movie, but
Yeah.
it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
You're making this film, and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind.
Playing Jesus Christ was supposed to be the role of a lifetime. But for Jim Caviezel, it became a professional death sentence. He was warned that taking the part would end his career, but he had no idea it would nearly end his life. Between being struck by lightning on set, having his flesh torn open by real lashes, and his heart literally failing under the weight of the cross, the physical agony was only the beginning. The real devastation started when the cameras stopped rolling and Hollywood began to systematically erase him from existence. Was the massive success of the film worth the brutal personal and professional cost he's still paying today? This is the side of the passion the studios don't want you to see. The warning and the call. When Mel Gibson first reached out to Jim Caviezel about playing Jesus, he did not start the talk with a standard pitch about fame or money. He sat the actor down and gave him a very blunt warning about what this choice would mean for his future. Gibson looked him in the eye and told him that if he took this part, he might never find work in Hollywood again. He was basically saying that the industry would turn its back on him because the movie was going to be so controversial. Most actors would have run away right then because they spend their whole lives trying to get into the inner circle of the movie business. And the thing is, Caviezel was actually doing quite well at the time. He was a rising star with big roles in movies like The Count of Monte Cristo and Frequency, so he had a lot to lose. Instead of being scared, Caviezel had a very calm response for the director. He told Gibson that every person has a cross they are meant to carry in life. He believed that if a person does not pick up their cross and carry it willingly, they will eventually be crushed under the weight of it anyway. This was his way of saying he was ready for the risk. He felt a deep sense of duty to tell this story, regardless of what it did to his bank account or his reputation. Gibson reportedly stayed still for a moment as he processed that answer. It was clear that this was not going to be a normal film production. There was also a very strange detail about Caviezel that made him feel like he was the only man for the job. At the time they started working on the project, he was exactly 33 years old. This is the same age that most historians and scholars believe Jesus was when he was crucified. On top of that, his initials are JC, which are the same initials as Jesus Christ. While some people might call that a weird fluke or just a lucky guess, Caviezel saw it as a sign from a higher power. He felt like his whole life had been moving toward this one specific moment. After Gibson explained that the movie would be one of the most difficult things an actor could ever be asked to do, Caviezel did not blink. He agreed to every single condition because he felt a calling that was much stronger than his fear of failure. He stepped into the role with his eyes wide open, but he had no idea that the physical world was about to test him in ways that seemed almost impossible to survive. A production in dead tongues. Learning a role is usually about memorizing lines in your own language, but for this project, the task was much harder. Gibson wanted the movie to feel like a window into the past, so he made the bold choice to skip English entirely. The actors had to speak only in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew. Caviezel had to spend many months working with linguists just to get the sounds right. And not only did he have to learn his own lines, he also had to understand the lines of everyone else in the scene, so he would know when to react. This just added more mental stress before he even stepped onto the set. The filming took place in a town in Italy called Matera. This place is famous for its ancient stone caves and rocky hills that look exactly like old Jerusalem. While it looks beautiful on camera, it was a very difficult place to work. The ground was uneven and the stone was hard, which made moving the heavy camera gear a constant struggle for the crew. Since they were filming in the winter, the stone was often icy and slick. Caviezel spent much of his time walking barefoot on these cold surfaces, which was just the beginning of the physical toll. One of the most intense parts of his daily routine was the makeup chair. To make the wounds look real, the makeup team had to arrive hours before the sun came up. Caviezel would often have to stand or sit still for up to 8 hours a day, while they applied layers of liquid latex and paint to his skin. This makeup was so thick that it caused his skin to break out in painful blisters. He could not lie down to rest because it would ruin the work, so he often had to stay in a rigged harness or a painful position for the entire day. Even though he was a fit man, the weight of the production was literal. The cross he had to carry through the streets of the Italian set weighed about 150 pounds. In many movies, props are made of light wood or foam, but Gibson wanted the real weight to show in the movements of the actor. You can see the struggle in his legs and back during those scenes because he was actually lugging a massive piece of timber. All of this preparation created an environment where the line between acting and reality started to blur, setting the stage for a series of events that felt like they came from a higher power. The day heaven struck back. The filming of the Sermon on the Mount is a scene most people remember for its beauty and the peaceful words being spoken, but for the cast and crew, it became the site of a terrifying event. Caviezel was standing on an open hillside in Italy, surrounded by hundreds of extras and crew members. The sky began to change, and the air felt heavy with a strange energy. Caviezel later told reporters that he actually felt something was about to happen a few seconds before the strike. He described a feeling of his hair standing up on end, which is a classic sign that the ground is about to be hit by a massive electrical charge. Suddenly, a huge bolt of lightning came down from the clouds and hit him directly. People standing nearby were frozen in shock. Those who saw it happen described fire coming out of both sides of the actor's head. It looked like he was glowing or had a ring of light around his entire body for a split second. Gibson was watching the scene through a video monitor and was completely baffled. He did not realize at first that his lead actor had just survived a direct hit from the sky. He reportedly looked up and asked what was wrong with Caviezel's hair because it was smoking and standing straight up. The odds of being hit by lightning are very low, but what happened next made the situation even more bizarre. The assistant director, John Michelini, ran over to check on Caviezel to see if he was still alive. As he reached out to help, a second bolt of lightning came down and struck Michelini as well. This was actually the second time Michelini had been hit during the production of this one movie. Scientists say the chance of a person being hit by lightning twice is about 1 in several million, so for it to happen on the same film set felt like more than just bad luck. Remarkably, Caviezel survived the strike without being killed or losing consciousness on the spot. He was shaken up, and his body felt the surge of energy for a long time afterward, but he stayed on his feet. The crew was left wondering if the weather was a random act of nature, or if there was a deeper meaning behind the sky opening up right in the middle of such a famous biblical scene. The physical toll of the scourging. The scene where the Roman soldiers whip Jesus is one of the most difficult parts of the film to watch, but it was even harder to film. Gibson wanted the scene to look as real as possible, so he had the actors playing the soldiers use actual whips. To keep Caviezel safe, the crew placed a large wooden board behind him. The plan was for the actors to swing the whips and hit the board instead of the actor. This would create the loud cracking sound and the motion of a real strike without actually hurting anyone. However, during one of the takes, one of the actors missed the board completely. The whip swung around and lashed directly across Caviezel's back. Mind you, this was not a light tap, but a full-force blow that tore a 14-inch gash into his skin. The pain was so sharp and sudden that it literally knocked the wind out of him. He could not scream or move. He just fell forward as his body went into shock. He later described the feeling as if someone had laid a hot coal against his bare skin. Because the cameras were rolling, that raw, pained reaction was caught on film. Most of the time, actors have to pretend to be in agony, but in this moment, the suffering was completely authentic. That was not the only time the whip found its mark. Later on, another strike caught him again, adding more bruises and cuts to his already battered body. The makeup team had to work around these real wounds, often applying their fake blood and latex over skin that was already raw and bleeding. This made the long hours in the makeup chair even more of a struggle. The constant pulling and cleaning of the area meant the wounds had a very hard time healing during the weeks they spent on those specific scenes. Beyond the whipping, the walk to the execution site added more physical damage. While carrying the heavy timber cross through the stone streets, Caviezel tripped and fell. The 150-pound piece of wood crashed down, pinning him to the ground and smashing into the side of his head. He bit his tongue and his cheek so hard that blood began to fill his mouth. Instead of stopping the scene, he kept going. If you look closely at the movie, you can see real blood dripping from his lips. These moments made it obvious that the film was more than just a job for him. It was a physical endurance test that was starting to break his body down, leading to the even more dangerous scenes on the cliff. Hanging on a cliff in the Italian winter. The scenes of the crucifixion were filmed in a place called Matera, which is an ancient stone city in southern Italy. While the area is famous for its history, the weather during the shoot was anything but pleasant. It was the middle of winter, and the film crew was working on a high, rocky cliff where the wind was constant and freezing. Caviezel had to spend hours on that cliff with almost no clothing on, wearing only a thin loincloth. The temperatures dropped to around 25 degrees, and the wind was blowing so hard that it felt like ice hitting his bare skin. Because he had to stay still for the camera, his body could not generate any heat. He developed a severe case of hypothermia, which is a dangerous condition where the body temperature drops too low. His skin actually turned blue, and this was not special effects or makeup. It got so bad that his lungs began to fill with fluid, leading to a serious case of pneumonia. He was coughing and struggling to breathe, but he still had to deliver his lines in ancient languages while his teeth were chattering uncontrollably. The physical strain on his body while hanging from the cross was also immense. Even though he was supported by hidden wires, the position of his arms caused his left shoulder to dislocate repeatedly. He was in constant pain, and his heart was under a massive amount of stress from the combination of the freezing cold and the physical trauma. A doctor on the set became very worried about the actor's life. He used a stethoscope to listen to Caviezel's heart and told Gibson that the actor's body was reaching a breaking point. The doctor warned that if they did not stop, the strain could actually kill him. Despite these terrifying warnings, Caviezel insisted on continuing. He felt that the pain he was going through helped him understand the weight of the story he was telling. He refused to go to a warm trailer or take a long break because he wanted the struggle to look real for the audience. The crew watched in a mix of awe and fear as he hung there in the bitter Italian wind, pushing his body far past what most people could ever endure. The unscripted conversions. While Caviezel was dealing with physical pain, the people around him were going through changes that no one expected. Because the movie was so intense, the atmosphere on set began to affect the cast in ways that were not in the script. The stories of what happened to the other actors are just as famous as the injuries Jim faced. Two actors in particular found that playing the enemies of Jesus changed their lives forever. The first was Pietro Sarubi, the man who played Barabbas. Before the movie, Pietro was not a religious person at all. He had traveled the world looking for peace, even living in a monastery in Tibet and practicing martial arts in China. But he always felt like something was missing. When he was cast as the criminal who was set free, Gibson told him to avoid looking at Caviezel until the camera was rolling. Mel wanted his reaction to be real. When the moment finally came and their eyes met, Pietro felt a shock move through his body like an electric current. He said he didn't see an actor. He saw the real Jesus looking back at him with love. That single look was enough to end his search for peace, and he converted to the faith right there on the set. There was also Luca Leonello, the actor who played Judas. Luca was a very vocal atheist who did not believe in God at all. He took the job as just another acting gig, but as the weeks went by, the weight of the story began to pull at him. By the time they finished filming the scenes where Judas betrays Jesus, Luca was a completely different man. He officially left his atheist beliefs behind and joined the church. He even went as far as to baptize his children and fix his marriage. And sure, these were great happenings or testimonies, but they did not, in any way, limit the struggle that actor Caviezel had to face even after the filming wrapped up. The decade of recovery. Most actors go on a holiday after a long shoot to recharge, but this was true for Caviezel, who had to begin a very long and painful journey back to health. The damage his body took on that set was not the kind of thing that goes away with a few days of rest. He had pushed himself so far into the danger zone that his internal systems were basically broken. The combination of the lightning strike and the freezing cold had left him with a heart that was no longer working the way it should. For the next 10 years, Caviezel had to deal with constant health scares. He suffered from chronic fatigue and breathing issues because of the pneumonia he caught while hanging on that cliff. His lungs had been through so much trauma that even simple tasks could leave him feeling drained. He also had to deal with the mental weight of what had happened to him. It is not easy to go back to a normal life after your heart was put under so much strain and you whipped so painfully. He was living in a state of constant recovery, trying to find a way to feel like himself again. The biggest hurdle happened in 2014, which was a full decade after the movie was released. His heart issues had reached a point where he could no longer ignore them. He had to go to the famous Cleveland Clinic to undergo a very serious open-heart surgery. This was a direct result of the physical stress and the electrical surge he took during the production. The surgery was a high-risk event, and it is reported that he actually had a near-death experience while he was on the operating table. He later told his doctors, Dr. Gilinoff and Dr. Griffin, that he felt that same deep peace he had felt on the cross years before. Once the surgery was over, his road to recovery finally took a turn for the better. It took many more months of rehabilitation to get his strength back, but he finally began to feel like the physical shadows of the movie were fading. He had spent 10 years carrying the physical marks of his performance, almost like he was still living in the character. This decade of pain changed his perspective on life and fame completely. He no longer cared about being the biggest star in the world and just wanted to be healthy and stay true to his beliefs. The Hollywood freeze and sound of freedom. After the massive success of the movie in 2004, you would think that Caviezel would have been the most wanted actor in the world. Usually, when a movie makes over $600 million, the lead star gets their pick of every big project in town. However, for Caviezel, the opposite happened. Gibson's warning came true in a very literal way. The big studios in Hollywood basically stopped calling him. He went from being a top choice for major action movies to finding himself on the outside looking in. He has said in many interviews that his name was crossed off the lists of the most powerful producers because he chose to play such a controversial figure. Instead of trying to change who he was to fit back in, Caviezel leaned further into his own path. He spent many years working on projects that matched his personal values. He starred in a popular television show called Person of Interest, where he played a man helping people in need, which allowed him to keep his career alive without needing a big movie studio's permission. He also took roles in smaller films about faith and history. He seemed content to work away from the red carpets and the huge parties, focusing on stories that he felt actually mattered to the world. Then, in 2023, something happened that caught the entire industry off guard. Caviezel starred in a film called Sound of Freedom. It was a thriller about a man trying to save children from traffickers. Most major studios did not want to touch the movie, and it sat on a shelf for years before a small company called Angel Studios helped release it. To everyone's surprise, it became a massive hit. On its opening day, it actually beat the new Indiana Jones movie at the box office. This was a huge deal because Indiana Jones had a giant budget and a massive marketing team, while Sound of Freedom relied mostly on word of mouth. The film eventually made over $250 million globally. Even though it was one of the most successful movies of the year, it was almost completely ignored during the big awards shows. Hollywood did not give it any nominations, and many critics tried to dismiss its success as a fluke. But the audiences keep showing up for Caviezel because they felt he was telling a truth that others were too afraid to touch. This success just showed that he did not need the approval of the big studios to have a voice. He had built a huge following of people who respected his grit and his willingness to stand by his beliefs, no matter the cost. This new momentum set him up for a final return to the role that started it all. Or so he thought. The preparation for the sequel. For many years, the idea of a sequel to the 2004 hit was just a rumor that movie fans discussed online. But as the year 2025 began, it became very clear that Gibson was finally ready to move forward with the project. The new film was titled The Resurrection of the Christ, and Caviezel was publicly named as the lead actor once again. This was a huge moment for him because it felt like he was finally going to finish the story he started 2 decades ago. Even though he was now in his late 50s, he was ready to step back into the most physically and mentally demanding role of his life. Caviezel's preparation for the sequel was not like a normal actor getting ready for a movie. He did not just hit the gym or work on his lines. He approached the role as a spiritual mission. In April 2025, he appeared on a podcast where he talked about how he was getting his mind and soul ready. He spent his days fasting and praying the rosary, trying to reach a state of deep focus. He even said that he planned to receive the Eucharist every single day while they were filming. He believed that the first movie was a battle, and he saw the sequel as a continuation of that war. He told his fans that he felt a direct calling to return, and he even claimed that Jesus had told him that there was nobody else for the role. There was a lot of talk about how he would look on screen since the new movie picks up just 3 days after the first one ended. In the real world, 20 years had passed, but in the story, almost no time had gone by. Gibson's plan was to use very advanced digital technology to make Caviezel look like a 33-year-old man again. This is the same kind of tech used in big movies like The Irishman to make actors look decades younger. Caviezel was excited about this because it meant he could bring the wisdom of his older age to a character that still looked young and vibrant. He was fully committed to the project, and he seemed more confident than ever. He told reporters that this new movie was going to be the biggest film in history and that it would explore things like heaven, hell, and the fall of the angels. He was all in, and the world was waiting to see him return to the screen in the iconic red robe. However, just as the cameras were about to start rolling at the famous studios in Rome, a sudden and massive change took place that nobody saw coming. The excitement of the preparation was about to hit a wall of reality that would change the future of the film forever. The 2025 casting shock. As the cameras were prepared to roll at the famous Cinecittà studios in Rome, fans were waiting for the first photos of Caviezel back in his iconic role. But in October 2025, a massive news story broke that shook the film world. Gibson made the shocking announcement that the entire cast of the sequel was being replaced. After over 20 years of waiting and all the spiritual preparation Caviezel had done, he was officially out of the project. The news moved fast across the internet as people tried to figure out how the man who nearly died for the first film could be left out of the second one. The reason for the change was mostly practical. Even though Gibson had talked about using digital tools to make the actors look younger, the cost was just too high. Since the new movie, titled The Resurrection of the Christ, starts only 3 days after the first one ended, they needed the characters to look exactly as they did in 2004. At 57 years old, Caviezel had aged in a way that would have required millions of dollars in computer effects to fix. To keep the movie realistic and on budget, Gibson decided to start fresh with a younger cast. The new actor chosen to play Jesus is Jaakko Ootinen, a 36-year-old from Finland who is best known for his work in the historical show The Last Kingdom. He was joined by Mariella Garriga, who replaced Monica Bellucci as Mary Magdalene. The entire ensemble was rebuilt, from the disciples to the Roman leaders. Filming began in Italy in late 2025, returning to the same rocky landscapes of Matera, where Caviezel had suffered through the freezing winds and lightning strikes 2 decades earlier. This decision left many fans feeling very conflicted. While some people understood the logic of recasting for a younger look, others felt that the movie could never be the same without the man who literally gave his health for the role. Caviezel had lived with the physical marks of the first film for over 10 years, and he was ready to give his all once again. Now, he will have to watch from the sidelines as the story continues on March 26, 2027, when the first part of the sequel finally hits cinemas. The man who was changed forever by this role has finished his journey, leaving a legacy that no amount of digital effects or new casting can ever truly replace. Tell us your thoughts. Do you think a sequel can ever feel as powerful without the actor who actually suffered for the role? And after everything he went through on that set, was it fair for the studio to replace Jim Caviezel just to save money on digital effects? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.